Chapter 3293, Chapter 367, Unbelievable Fortune. Chapter 3293, Chapter 367, Unbelievable Fortune. Chapter 367, Unbelievable Fortune. Shifeng was at a loss for words as he looked at the two items in his hands. As expected of the Divine Seal Saint's favorite son, this degree of wealth is enough to put even upper-ranking hegemonic powers to shame. Out of the two items Dira dropped, one of them was a pouch with ancient runes covering it. When Shifeng saw this pouch, mixed feelings filled his heart. An inferior legendary spatial bag. Indeed, one of the two dropped items was an inferior legendary spatial bag, something Shifeng had never owned, even in his previous life. In the greater god's domain, epic spatial bags were more or less regarded as the highest-ranked spatial bag players could get their hands on. Meanwhile, the value of epic spatial bags could rival fragmented legendary items. Epic spatial bags were highly valuable because they could store non-bag space items like 7 luminaries crystals. So long as players had an epic spatial bag, they could carry these non-bag space items through teleportation arrays, drastically improving the efficiency of transporting these items. Even so, epic spatial bags had limited storage space. Generally, an epic spatial bag could only hold up to 100 non-bag space items. If all this space was used to store 7 luminaries crystals, an epic spatial bag could carry 1 million units. Because of this, players couldn't transport a large amount of non-bag space items like merchant caravans simply by relying on one, or even several, epic spatial bags. However, it was a different story for inferior legendary spatial bags. The capacity of one was on par with a medium-sized guild warehouse. In other words, it could store up to 1,000 non-bag space items or 10 million units of 7 luminaries crystal. One inferior legendary spatial bag could already rival the cargo load of a small merchant caravan in the greater god's domain. Because of this, inferior legendary spatial bags were astronomical in value. It was even more valuable than legendary weapons. At the same time, inferior legendary spatial bags were incredibly rare, and there did not exist more than 20 of them in the entire Starlight Realm. Moreover, this was after many years of accumulation in the Starlight Realm. So, for Dira to have one showed just how much the Divine Seal Saint loved his youngest son. However, compared to the inferior legendary spatial bag, the bag's contents were even more shocking. 7 luminaries crystals. A huge amount of 7 luminaries crystals. More specifically, 31 million units of 7 luminaries crystal. Even upper-ranking hegemonic powers would drool over such an amount. This amount was probably already enough to match an ordinary hegemonic power's entire stockpile. After all, many situations in the greater god's domain required the use of 7 luminaries crystal. Aside from letting Tier 5 players get promoted to Tier 6, 7 luminaries crystals were also needed to help Tier 6 players recover after death. So, it wasn't easy to accumulate 7 luminaries crystals. Meanwhile, aside from 7 luminaries crystals, the spatial bag also contained 29 god crystals and 5 bronze warships. This was wealth that the miniature ancient world's hegemonic powers could only dream of owning. It seems Dira has exploited the various hegemonic powers quite a lot, Shifeng thought as he looked at all the 7 luminaries crystals and god crystals in the inferior legendary spatial bag. There was no way this astonishing wealth came from the Divine Seal Saint. After all, even the Divine Seal Saint would have difficulty taking out such wealth. So, Dira must have acquired this wealth by exploiting the miniature ancient world's various hegemonic powers. Now, though, Dira's exploitation was going to benefit Shifeng. Afterward, Shifeng turned his gaze to the other item Dira dropped. It was a ring. A very extraordinary ring. Sacred Phantom Ring, fragmented legendary rank, equipment requirement, Tier 4 all attributes, increases according to the user's level, when equipped, increases all attributes by 40%, increases reaction speed and attack speed by 100%, weakens all attacks at Tier 5 and below by 70%, ignore levels plus 20, increases movement speed by 50%. Additional passive skill Phantom Obstruction, hides the wearer's information, preventing others from inspecting it. Additional active skill 1, True Phantom, disguises all of the wearer's information. Duration, unlimited cooldown, 1 hour additional active skill 2, Phantom Substitute. Take on a true death on the wearer's behalf. Cooldown, 1 natural day. The sacred phantom ring will be dropped after taking on a true death on the wearer's behalf. When you're just trying to make great content at me. The sacred phantom ring is the accumulation of the entire ancient elven race's strength. It is rumored that the ring can help its wearer escape all forms of death and acquire eternal energy. The sacred phantom ring was broken during the ancient holy war, but it can automatically repair itself with 4 ancient magic elven stones. The divine seal saint really does love his youngest son. If this thing is fully repaired, it might even become a divine artifact. Shifeng was greatly astonished by the sacred phantom ring's abilities, particularly the phantom substitute skill. The ability to avoid true death was something countless players in the greater god's domain dreamed of obtaining. Even tier 6 players were not an exception. Items that let players avoid true death were so rare that not even the executives of Apex Powers would necessarily have one. In God's domain, true death for players meant having their immortal souls destroyed completely. Meanwhile, the consequence of such a situation wouldn't be limited to account deletion. Instead, players who had their immortal souls destroyed would lose the right to enter God's domain for the rest of their lives. Many tier 6 powerhouses wouldn't hesitate to trade a legendary weapon for the ability to escape true death even once. Not to mention, so long as players had a way of recovering the sacred phantom ring, it was technically possible to avoid true death once every day. Looking at the sacred phantom ring's effects, Shifeng found it hard to believe that it was only rated as a fragmented legendary item rather than a legendary item. After all, apart from letting its wearer avoid true death, the ring could also hide and disguise its wearer's information. While these 2 abilities might not be useful to Dira since nobody would dare to harm him under normal circumstances, these abilities were incredibly useful for people trying to evade detection or escape from pursuers. If the sacred phantom ring got repaired, Shifeng couldn't even begin to imagine how powerful its life-saving capabilities would become. If the ring turned out to be a divine artifact, it might truly be able to let its wearer escape all forms of death and become an unkillable existence. If that were the case, even the various Apex powers would have to fear such an existence. It seems killing Dira wasn't entirely a bad choice, Shifeng thought as he put on the sacred phantom ring, causing his basic attributes to increase significantly. At this point, he could even rival Iron Crocodile, a level 136, tier 5 sacred Sky Knight. Subsequently, Shifeng turned his gaze to a tattered tablet in his spatial bag, a flash of excitement appearing in his eyes. Now that I have 34 God Crystals, I can use some to repair the Abyss Workshop certification. The Abyss Workshop certification, even while damaged, the Abyss Workshop certification was already of great help to him, allowing him to recruit geniuses from the stratified abyssal realm and travel between worlds easily. If the Abyss Workshop certification's effects could be further improved, it would undoubtedly be of even greater help to him. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Chapter 3294, Chapter 368, Repaired Abyss Workshop Certification. Chapter 3294, Chapter 368, Repaired Abyss Workshop Certification. Chapter 368, Repaired Abyss Workshop Certification. After deciding to repair the Abyss Workshop Certification, Shifeng began taking out sparkling fist-sized crystals from his bag one after another. The power of Tier 6 gods was condensed in these crystals, and Shifeng merged 10 of these god crystals into the damaged stone slab on the floor. As soon as Shifeng merged the 10th god crystal with the stone slab, the latter seemingly came to life. Thump, thump, thump. The sound of a beating heart continuously echoed throughout the room. At the same time, divine runes started to appear on the damaged stone slab and drain the room of all its mana. At some point, the room even began to shake and tremble, looking like it could crumble apart at any moment. Thankfully, the barrier in this room can stop up to Tier 5 attacks. Otherwise, these fluctuations will most certainly attract a lot of attention. Shifeng sighed in relief when he saw the room and its defensive barrier staying in one piece. Every legendary item had heaven-defying effects, so the recovery of any legendary item would cause a huge commotion. Oftentimes, the commotion caused would alert others nearby of a legendary item's presence. Meanwhile, if players with special identification skills took notice of the commotion, they could inspect the legendary item even without the owner's consent. Shifeng wouldn't have minded others finding out if he was only repairing an ordinary legendary item. However, it was a different story for the Abyss Workshop certification. The Abyss Workshop certification was an ancient god's possession. Ancient gods were the strongest known existences in the greater gods domain. They were the goals of many gods and Tier 6 players. However, ancient gods had long since secluded themselves from the greater gods domain, so even finding a clue pertaining to ancient gods was exceedingly difficult, let alone a possession directly related to an ancient god. Moreover, the Abyss Workshop certification had a very special function. It could be used to teleport players directly to the Abyss Workshop, one of the greater gods domain's 3 great workshops. This was a place all players and powers sought to visit. It was rumored that the 3 great workshops held the most advanced technologies available in the greater gods domain, and even the likes of epic combat puppets could be purchased from the 3 great workshops. Epic combat puppets. It should be known that every epic combat puppet had the strength to rival Tier 6 gods. In other words, even if a player was only at Tier 1, so long as they could control an epic combat puppet, they would be stronger than a large majority of the Tier 6 players that existed in the greater gods domain. Meanwhile, epic combat puppets were but the most basic technology available in the 3 great workshops. According to a legend, a player had managed to create an empire that spanned multiple gods' domains because of an item they bought from a great workshop. At the time, said player dared challenge even the greater gods' domain's apex powers. It was just that the player had failed miserably in their attempt at invading the 12 sanctuaries and thus vanished from the greater gods' domain's history. Because of this legend, all players and powers in the greater gods' domain sought to enter the 3 great workshops. Unfortunately, the 3 great workshops were incredibly mysterious. Their entrances would also randomly appear, and finding them was a task so challenging that even apex powers could do nothing but scratch their heads in frustration. So, if news spread that there was an item capable of letting players teleport to the Abyss Workshop, all players and powers in the greater gods domain would definitely try to obtain it, even if it meant destroying the entire miniature ancient world. Of course, even if the average player managed to enter one of the 3 great workshops, they couldn't do anything unless they had the necessary currencies to do business there. Currently, although Shifeng could already travel to the Abyss Workshop, without the Abyss Workshop's currency, he would only be wasting his time and the Abyss Workshop certification's skill cooldown. However, this naturally wasn't a problem for the greater gods domain's various apex powers and conglomerates. They had long accumulated a significant sum of the 3 great workshops' currencies over the many years they had existed. They were only missing a method to enter the 3 great workshops. While Shifeng was lost in his thoughts, the Abyss Workshop certification was completely repaired, and a stone slab covered in divine runes presented itself to Shifeng. The divine might the stone slab radiated was so powerful that even Tier 4 players would have great difficulty getting close to it, let alone handling it. Abyss Workshop certification, legendary rank item, a certification of glory in the past. It can be used to teleport to the Abyss Workshop. Cannot be traded. There is a 1% drop rate on death. When you're just trying to make great content at me. Automatically disappears if stored in a warehouse for more than 90 natural days. Additional skill 1 Abyss teleportation. Teleport to the Abyss Workshop from any location. Each teleportation will cost 100 dark crystals. Cooldown, 10 natural days. Additional skill 2 World-breaking teleportation, forcibly opens a world-breaking gate at a pre-designated location. Up to 9 locations can be saved. Each gate can only transfer up to 20 people. Each gate activation costs 1,000 units of 7 luminaries crystals. Cooldown, 12 hours. As expected of an ancient god's possession. These effects are even more absurd than that sacred phantom ring, Shifeng inwardly exclaimed when he finished reading the Abyss Workshop certification's updated information. The Abyss Workshop certification was already plenty incredible previously. After all, the world-breaking teleportation skill alone was enough to stir the desires of the greater gods domain's various powers, let alone the ability to teleport directly to the Abyss Workshop. Now, the Abyss Workshop certification had become even more astonishing, allowing him to save up to 9 locations with the world-breaking teleportation skill instead of just 3 locations. This meant that he could teleport between 9 worlds. This was an unbelievable ability for players and powers seeking to develop across multiple worlds. Moreover, the 9 locations didn't necessarily have to be in the same realm. In other words, it was possible to achieve cross-realm teleportation with the Abyss Workshop certification. It should be known that teleportation between realms was an exorbitant expense even to Tier 6 players. The average Tier 5 player couldn't even afford such an expense and could only choose the more time-consuming option of traveling with cross-realm merchant caravans. Yet, now, he only needed to spend 1,000 units of 7 Luminaries crystal to teleport up to 20 players between worlds or realms. If all 20 slots were filled, the teleportation fee for each person would only be 50 units of 7 Luminaries crystal. That was a ridiculously low price to pay. Most importantly, the cooldown for world-breaking teleportation had been reduced from 10 days to just 12 hours. This reduction made it possible to normalize teleportation between worlds or realms. He would no longer have to carefully weigh the use of each teleportation. It seems I won't have to miss the Galaxy Conglomerate's Invitational Competition now, Shifeng thought. The Galaxy Conglomerate's Invitational Competition was related to one of the 6 great divine sets. Unless absolutely necessary, Shifeng did not wish to give up on the invitational competition. Previously, if Shifeng wanted to leave the miniature ancient world and make it in time for the competition, his only option was to wait for the world passage to open and leave through there. However, trying to leave through the world passage would be no different than suicide since the Paimon conglomerate would definitely be waiting for him on the other side. Meanwhile, when he returned to the miniature ancient world, the preliminaries for the Galaxy Conglomerate's Invitational Competition had already begun. So, it shouldn't be more than a week before the preliminaries were over and the main event began. Yet, the previous world-breaking teleportation had a 10-day cooldown. By the time the skill's cooldown was done, it would already be too late for him to participate in the competition. Now, though, he no longer had to worry about missing the competition. Greater God's Domain, Starlight Realm. On a flying ship traveling across a vast galaxy, a level 205, Tier 6 assassin clad in an 8-piece fragmented legendary equipment set approached a blue-robed young man. Lord Divine Seal, a report just came in stating that young Master Dira nearly died a true death in a miniature world, the Tier 6 assassin anxiously said. Upon hearing the assassin's words, the blue-robed youth asked in a cold voice, "Who did it?" "Black Flame. The culprit is a swordsman named Black Flame. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible." Chapter 3295, Chapter 369 Laura Crader arrives. Chapter 3295, Chapter 369 Laura Crader arrives. Chapter 369, Laura Crader arrives. Thunder Fortress, Red Moon Harbor. One after another, ships continued to pour into the Thunder Fortress from the Sea of Dark Thunder. Apart from advanced ships, there were many bronze speedboats and even warships among these ships, their numbers far greater than the ships that had entered the Thunder Fortress the past few days. This scene shocked the players who had only recently arrived at the Thunder Fortress. However, their shock wasn't solely due to the great number of ships. Instead, it was also because of the strength of the players alighting from these ships. The majority of these new arrivals were independent players. These independent players arrived in teams, and there would be at least 2 or 3 Tier 4 players in every 20-man team. In addition, every one of these independent players was at level 134 and above and was fully clad in epic weapons and equipment. The equipment standard of these independent teams was already comparable to the various powers' main forces. Sure enough, those guys came running here as well. A tall, middle-aged man who had just alighted from a bronze speedboat said, a wry smile appearing on his face when he saw the several dozen attention-grabbing teams at the harbor. At the same time as this middle-aged man stepped onto the harbor, the other independent teams at the harbor also turned their attention to him. The reason all these independent teams paid attention to the middle-aged man wasn't just because he was a level 135, Tier 4 shield warrior, or the 20-man team he led was fully composed of Tier 4 players. More than that, It was because of the adventurer team the middle-aged man represented. 5 Dragons' Fang. Apart from guilds, adventurer teams were also a formidable force in the Greater Gods domain. In fact, over 60% of the Greater Gods domains, the trade and transportation industries, were under the various adventurer teams' control. Meanwhile, out of the many adventurer teams in the Greater Gods domain, 5 Dragons' Fang was a considerably famous top adventurer team in the Starlight Realm, ranking among the top 100 of the Starlight Realm's adventurer teams. Although 5 Dragons' Fang had fewer than 100,000 members, which was nothing compared to hegemonic powers with tens or hundreds of millions of members, its overall strength and influence were enough to deter the various hegemonic powers from provoking it. It can't be helped, Commander. Any adventurer team worth their salt will know that it's impossible to continue staying in the miniature ancient world. Now, all we can do is earn some contribution points from the Adventurers Association before packing up and leaving, a level 136, Tier 4 female oracle said, sighing. Originally, the various adventurer teams were supposed to enter the World Passage on the second day after its opening to sweep the leftover void monsters that various hegemonic powers couldn't be bothered to take care of. After all, although the World Passage's opening rewards were tempting, most of the adventurer teams currently operating in the miniature ancient world had come here to do trade and sell transportation services. Firstly, plenty of precious resources were available in the miniature ancient world. While the various hegemonic powers would take control of most of these resources, a significant sum would still be available on the open market. If the various adventurer teams resold these leftover resources in the Greater Gods domain, a significant profit could still be made. Not to mention, they could also resell resources exclusive to the Greater Gods domain in the miniature ancient world, making an equally large profit. Secondly, even after an isolated world's World Passage opened, traveling between said world and the Greater Gods domain wouldn't be easy. Even the various hegemonic powers' elite teams could face annihilation if they weren't careful. Moreover, the danger in a World Passage wasn't constant. Instead, it would change depending on the World Passage's activation degree and the standard of the world it was connected to. Because of this, many players lacking strength might never be able to travel between worlds unless they received outside help, and this was where the various adventurer teams came in. Unfortunately, now that Shafong had gone and killed Dira, the miniature ancient world had become an incredibly dangerous place, and any adventurer team worth its salt would know not to stay in this world for even a second longer. Indeed, the middle-aged man nodded. The Divine Seal Saint has gone crazy after learning about Dira's death, so much so that he has mobilized the Commander Wind Seal to block off the entire World Passage. From what I heard, the Divine Seal Saint is planning to eliminate Black Flame and everyone related to him. The Divine Seal Saint had 4 mighty experts working under him, also known as the 4 Seals. Not only did the 4 Seals receive the Divine Seal legacy, but each of them also led a team of 100 Tier 6 experts, and just one of these teams was enough to obliterate an ordinary hegemonic power. Although the Divine Seal Saint was only targeting Black Flame and those related to him, who could say for certain others wouldn't be implicated? If any unlucky team or player got falsely accused of having ties to Black Flame, that would be the end of their careers in God's domain and their lives in the real world. Because of this, neither adventurer teams nor powers that had entered the miniature ancient world dared to continue staying in this world. While the people in the Thunder Fortress were in an uproar, the Blood Rabbit Hotel welcomed a group of guests. Although this group consisted of only 6 players, the sight of these 6 caused everyone in the hotel's lobby to gasp. Not only were all 6 of these players at level 140, but every one of them had upwards of 3 fragmented legendary items. With such equipment and level, these 6 players definitely ranked at the very top of the miniature ancient world in terms of strength. Yet, these 6 players did not belong to a guild. Instead, they only came from an adventurer team. The Glimmer adventurer team. Even Shafong was surprised when he saw Glimmer's party of 6. Apart from Laura Crader and Kagio, this was the first time Shafong was meeting with the 4 other players in Laura's party, but every one of these 4 new faces possessed strength at the standard of titled experts. This was a lineup not even the various hegemonic powers could put together in the miniature ancient world. Yet, the Glimmer adventurer team managed to do so. Blood Rabbit Hotel, VIP Lounge, Guild Leader Black Flame, according to the information I received, I'm afraid Zero Wing cannot continue to stay in the miniature ancient world, Laura Crader frankly said. Then in an earnest tone, she continued, my suggestion is to temporarily disband Zero Wing and get ready to retreat from the miniature ancient world with a group of core members. Although the Divine Seal Saint will have a tight blockade on the other side, so long as I can get promoted to Tier 5, I am confident I can break through that blockade with a few dozen people. Once in the Greater God's domain, so long as you leave the Starlight Realm, even the Divine Seal Saint will have difficulty getting his hands on you. She's confident in breaking through? Shifeng was shocked when he heard Laura's claims. He didn't think that Laura would be hiding such strength. Shifeng knew that the Divine Seal Saint had stationed Wind Seal, one of the 4 seals, on the other end of the world passage. According to rumors, not only did Wind Seal possess a legendary weapon, but he was even strong enough to rival Tier 6 gods of the same level. On top of that, Wind Seal also had a 100-man team of Tier 6 players supporting him. After learning about this lineup, even Shifeng wasn't confident in breaking through the Paimon conglomerate's blockade. Yet, Laura was confident in doing so. Your suggestion is excellent, Commander Laura, but Zero Wing will not disband. Neither will Zero Wing leave the miniature ancient world, Shifeng said, shaking his head. The Divine Seal Saint's forces might be strong, but that doesn't make Zero Wing a pushover. If he dares to bare his fangs in the miniature ancient world, he'll have to be prepared to lose them. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Chapter 3296, Chapter 370, Tier 5 Advanced Epic. Chapter 3296, Chapter 370, Tier 5 Advanced Epic. Chapter 370, Tier 5 Advanced Epic. Shifeng's firm words rendered Laura and her party members speechless. Guild leader Blackflame, the current Zero Wing is indeed close to catching up to the various hegemonic powers in the miniature ancient world, but the forces the Divine Seal Saint can send here go far beyond the various hegemonic powers, Laura patiently explained. Tier 4 players might be rare in the miniature ancient world, but they are everywhere in the Greater God's domain. Once the world passage opens, it won't take the Paimon conglomerate more than 2 or 3 days to clear out the entire passage and flood the miniature ancient world with Tier 4 experts. At that time, we aren't talking about facing just a few hundred or a few thousand Tier 4 experts, but hundreds of thousands instead. Moreover, these Tier 4 experts will have much better weapons and equipment. Travel across a world passage might be challenging, but with the Paimon conglomerate's strength and influence, it would have no trouble transporting a few 100,000 Tier 4 experts into the miniature ancient world. Meanwhile, such a force was enough to destroy the entire miniature ancient world many times over, let alone destroy Zero Wing. It didn't matter even if Shifeng possessed a legendary weapon. Once the world passage opened, players entering the miniature ancient world might have to deal with level and tier restrictions, but there wouldn't be any restrictions on weapons, equipment, and tools. It might be hard to come by legendary weapons and equipment in the current miniature ancient world, but there were plenty in the Greater God's domain. For a long-standing existence like the Paimon conglomerate, the number of legendary weapons and equipment under its possession vastly outstripped even the various hegemonic powers. So long as the Paimon conglomerate sent over a few of its legendary weapons and equipment, Shifeng would be doomed. Shifeng was admittedly very strong, but how many players equipped with legendary weapons and equipment could he go up against simultaneously? However, Shifeng did not bother explaining his decision to Laura. Instead, he asked, Commander Laura, are you planning to take on the Greater God's domain once you get promoted to Tier 5? Laura's identity and strength were a big mystery to Shifeng. When Shifeng met Laura, the other party's primary goal was to enter the Greater God's domain. They had even signed a contract around this condition. However, it also seemed like Laura was considerably knowledgeable about the Greater God's domain and knew that it'd be incredibly dangerous to roam the Greater God's domain as a Tier 4 player. Hence, she had yet to leave the miniature ancient world until now. That is indeed my intention. Laura was initially stunned, failing to understand why Shifeng would ask such a question. However, she still chose to give Shifeng a proper answer. Although the miniature ancient world still holds many secrets, many more opportunities are available in the Greater God's domain. The miniature ancient world would no longer hold much value to her once she reached Tier 5. A big part of why she came to find Shifeng this time was to return the favor she owed him. Meanwhile, she would return this favor by bringing Zero Wings members into the Greater God's domain with her. How about making another deal with me, Commander Laura? Shifeng asked. A deal? What kind of deal? Laura grew even more confused. Rather than try to get out of his current predicament, Shifeng was instead looking to make a deal with her. What was he even thinking? Once you are promoted to Tier 5, stay in the miniature ancient world and protect Zero Wing for a month, Shifeng said, smiling. In exchange, I can help you go further in your Tier 5 promotion. The woman known as Laura Crader undoubtedly possessed extraordinary strength. Even though she had only revealed a portion of her strength thus far, it was already enough to put her in the top 10 of the miniature ancient world's god list. Moreover, Laura was confident in breaking through the Paimon conglomerate's blockade once she became a Tier 5 Sword Saint. If that were the case, she'd be of even greater help to Zero Wing if she remained in the miniature ancient world. Shifeng needed to participate in the Galaxy Conglomerate's invitational competition, so he wouldn't be able to stay in the miniature ancient world to protect Zero Wing during that period. If Zero Wing could have Laura protecting it, he could participate in the competition without any worries. Go further in the Tier 5 promotion? An elderly male elementalist from the Glimmer Adventurer team laughed when he heard Shifeng's words. Young man, do you know what rank Commander Laura can achieve when creating her Tier 5 mana body? Aside from the elderly elementalist, the three other unfamiliar faces in Laura's party also laughed. Epic rank, right? Shifeng said blandly. Apart from reaching level 140, Tier 4 players seeking to get promoted to Tier 5 in God's domain also needed to create a Tier 5 mana body that suited them. Meanwhile, the Tier 5 mana bodies players created would vary in strength, the ranks going from bronze, silver, gold, and epic. For most paragons in the Greater God's domain, their lifelong goal was to create a Tier 5 epic mana body. That way, they could become a powerhouse in the Greater God's domain once they reached Tier 6. Meanwhile, the Divine Seal Saint was one such powerhouse. It was also why many paragons refused to get promoted to Tier 5. Only, out of the many paragons in the Greater God's domain, less than 1% of them would succeed in creating a Tier 5 epic mana body. You are indeed insightful, Guild Leader Black Flame, the elderly elementalist said, nodding. Then, with a proud smile on his face, he continued, you are correct. Commander Laura can already create a Tier 5 epic mana body. So, do you still think you can be of any help to her? In the Greater God's domain, even conglomerates would celebrate for 3 days and 3 nights if one of their paragons managed to create a Tier 5 epic mana body, while hegemonic powers would celebrate 10 days and 10 nights if they gained such a paragon. In response, Shifeng looked at the elderly elementalist before saying, what if I say I can help Commander Laura push her mana body to the advanced epic rank? The advanced epic rank? The elderly elementalist didn't believe Shifeng's words for even a moment. Are you playing a joke on this old man, Guild Leader Black Flame? It was true that the epic rank wasn't the limit for Tier 5 mana bodies. Above epic mana bodies were advanced epic mana bodies. However, even acquiring a Tier 5 epic mana body was already an astounding achievement in the Greater God's domain, let alone a Tier 5 advanced epic mana body. According to his knowledge, individuals capable of reaching this standard were all mythical figures in the Greater God's domain. What did it mean to be a mythical figure in the Greater God's domain? It meant that every one of these individuals was qualified to antagonize apex powers. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Chapter 3297, Chapter 371, Legendary Reward. Chapter 3297, Chapter 371, Legendary Reward. Chapter 371, Legendary Reward. Blood Rabbit Hotel, VIP Lounge. This time, the elderly elementalist wasn't the only one who doubted Shifeng's words. Even Laura couldn't believe what Shifeng had just said. Guild Leader Black Flame, it is nigh impossible for me to create an advanced epic mana body, Laura said, shaking her head. Just creating an epic mana body is already my limit. The difficulty of creating an advanced version is several times greater. If there really exists a way that can help me create an advanced epic mana body, I wouldn't have chosen to get promoted to tier 5 now. Which is why I said it is a transaction, Chiffon calmly said to Laura. I will help you create an advanced epic mana body. In return, you will help me protect Zero Wing for a month. I'm sure this is a worthwhile transaction for you, right, Commander Laura? After all, you know how hard it is to create an advanced epic mana body. Are you really sure about that, Guild Leader Black Flame? Laura asked, a confused look appearing on her face as she looked at Chiffon. Ever since arriving at the miniature ancient world, Laura thought that she had already learned everything there was to know about Zero Wing and Chiffon. So, she couldn't help but be puzzled by the conditions Chiffon was presenting her with. The advanced epic mana body was akin to a myth in the greater god's domain. It was something even conglomerates and apex powers could only hope and pray to obtain. Yet, Chiffon spoke as if attaining it wasn't a challenge. Instead, it was only a matter of whether he wanted to or not. If Chiffon truly did have a way to help others achieve an advanced epic mana body, any paragon in the greater god's domain wouldn't hesitate to work for Chiffon for even a decade, let alone a month. Of course. Chiffon smiled and nodded. We can even sign a god's domain contract on it. If you fail to create an advanced epic mana body, you won't have to protect Zero Wing in the miniature ancient world. The creation of an advanced epic mana body was indeed a massive challenge. Even during his previous life, Chiffon had only ever managed to create a standard epic mana body. However, he now had the complete 100 refinement building in his possession, and the 100 refinement building's second floor was specialized in helping players create mana bodies. After experiencing the effects of the complete 100 refinement building's first floor himself, Chiffon was confident that Laura, with her talent to create an epic mana body without any help, could easily create an advanced epic mana body with the hidden construction's help. Honestly, with how massive of an opportunity he was offering to Laura, he would have been well within his rights even if he had asked Laura to protect Zero Wing for a much longer time. The reason he only asked Laura to help Zero Wing for a month was so that he could have an easier time pulling Laura to his side. He had never heard of Laura's name or her nickname of Shimmering Sword during his previous life. Yet, there was no doubt that Laura's strength and talent far surpassed Wordless Ember and Slumbering Quicksand. If Laura could safely develop herself, her future achievements would undoubtedly surpass Wordless Ember and Slumbering Quicksand. Okay, you have a deal, Laura said. I promise you that so long as you can help me create an advanced epic mana body, I will ensure nobody, not even the Paimon conglomerate, can harm Zero Wing in the miniature ancient world for a month. I will also owe you a huge favor on top of that, and you can use this favor to ask me of anything. I will even go against an apex power if you want me to. Commander. The elderly elementalist was shocked by Laura's words. He didn't think Laura would offer such a condition to Chiffon. Others might think Laura was joking when she said she would go against even an apex power, but those who knew her would know that she wasn't joking. Let's sign a contract, then. However, I'll put it out first, but you must keep my methods a secret. Unless I allow it, you must never tell a third party about my methods, Chiffon said as he took out the God's Domain contract he had prepared in advance. That won't be a problem, Laura agreed without hesitation. Then, signed Chiffon's contract after seeing no problems with it. After both parties signed the contract, Chiffon brought Laura away from the lounge, leaving behind Cassio and the others. Blood Rabbit Hotel, VIP guest room. While Laura was wondering how Chiffon would help her to create an advanced epic mana body, Chiffon took out a stone tablet and opened a space-time passage. When Laura stepped through the space-time passage, she couldn't help but be shocked. Isn't this the greater god's domain? When Laura sensed the world suppression unique to the greater god's domain, she couldn't help but turn back and look at the vanishing space-time passage in disbelief. Traveling between the various worlds of God's domain was a very troublesome affair and could normally only be achieved through world passages. So, in a situation where a world's world passage remained closed, it was nigh impossible for players to travel into and out of said world. Yet, Chiffon had shattered this rule, accomplishing interworld travel without the use of a world passage. That's right. We are currently in the ancient River Kingdom's Gazing Moon City, Chiffon said, nodding. But we don't have a lot of time. I also have quite a few problems here, so we'll need to travel incognito. After saying so, Shifeng used the sacred phantom ring to alter his appearance into that of a young swordsman. He also changed his ID to Yi Feng, the one he had been using throughout his previous life. Then, after doing all that, he put on a black cloak. With this, even if others used advanced identification skills on him, they would only see the information hidden by the black cloak. They wouldn't be able to tell that this information was falsified. Laura was not surprised by Shifeng's transformation. After putting on a black cloak, she followed Shifeng out of the Gazing Moon Hotel. Fortunately, they did not attract any red players' attention and safely arrived at the 100 Refinement Building situated in the western parts of the city. 100 Refinement Building, first floor lobby. When Shifeng and Laura entered the building, the elderly great wizard manning the front desk instantly recognized Shifeng despite Shifeng's disguise. You really know how to surprise me, young man. It's only been a few days, yet you've already collected so many 7 luminaries crystals, the old man said with a surprised look. Then, he sighed and continued, had I known you were so capable, I should have asked for 1,000,000 units instead. You've really gotten yourself a bargain, young man. Here are the promised 7 luminaries crystals, Shifeng said, rolling his eyes at the old man as he took out 89,000 units of 7 luminaries crystal. I've completed the quest, right? It should be known that 100,000 units of 7 luminaries crystal were not a small amount. If he didn't get lucky and acquired Dira's wealth, he would have needed to expend a lot of effort to gather the required crystals. Fine. After accepting the 7 luminaries crystals, the great wizard sighed again and said, your quest is complete. All of this 100 Refinement Building now belongs to you. After saying so, the elderly great wizard passed a crystalline key to Shifeng before vanishing without a trace. Immediately afterward, Shifeng received a series of system notifications. System, congratulations. You have completed the legendary Quest 100 Refinement Mana Body. Rewarding Demon God's Key, 10 levels, and 30 free legacy skill points. System, you will have to pay a monthly management fee of 10,000 units of 7 luminaries crystal for the 100 Refinement Building. If you fail to make payment for 3 consecutive months, Gazing Moon City will repossess all authority over the 100 Refinement Building. System, you have activated the second phase of the legendary Quest 100 Refinement Mana Body. Quest content, create a Tier 5 legendary mana body within 50 days. Rewards unknown. Penalties unknown. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Chapter 3298, Chapter 372, Astonishing Second Floor. Chapter 3298, Chapter 372, Astonishing Second Floor. Chapter 372, Astonishing Second Floor. There's a second phase to this quest? The system notification dumbfounded Shifeng. A legendary quest was originally more than enough of a headache already. Previously, Shifeng had no choice but to accept one because of the 100 Refinement Building. Yet, after going through so much effort to complete it, he was now told that there was a second phase to this quest. Moreover, of all the things he could have been asked to do, it just had to be the creation of a legendary mana body. A legendary mana body. This was something he had never even heard of. Shifeng's original goal in acquiring the key to the 100 Refinement Building's second floor was to go beyond the epic threshold and create the mythical advanced epic mana body. Yet, now, he was required to create a legendary mana body, and he had to do so within 50 days. At this point, he couldn't help but suspect if this quest could even be completed. Guild Leader Black Flame. A look of confusion appeared on Laura's face as she looked at Shifeng. She noticed Shifeng's level instantly increasing from 140 to 150, so it was obvious he had just completed a considerably challenging quest. Normally, this should be a cause for celebration. Yet, Shifeng did not look happy at all. On the contrary, he looked gloomy and frustrated. I'm fine. It's just a minor problem, Shifeng explained. Then, he made his way to the second floor while saying, let's begin. The quest was forced onto him, and he couldn't abandon it even if he wanted to. So, His only option now was to create a legendary mana body. The layout of the 100 Refinement Building's second floor was the same as the first floor, having only 4 training rooms. So, only up to 4 people could train at the same time. However, compared to the first floor's training rooms, the second floor's training rooms cost a lot more. It only cost 100 units of 7 luminaries crystal to use the first floor's training rooms, but the second floor's training rooms cost a whopping 10,000 units. Even guilds would have difficulty affording such a price, let alone individual players. It should be known that there were many expert players at the third floor standard in the Greater Gods domain. At this standard, players were already strong enough to ascend to Tier 6. Yet, in reality, not even a fraction of these third-floor experts were Tier 6 players, and the reason causing this was that most of these third-floor experts lacked the 7 luminaries crystals needed to challenge their Tier 6 promotion. In a situation where a player couldn't even afford the 7 luminaries crystals to get promoted to Tier 6, it was highly unlikely this player would be willing to spend 10,000 units of 7 luminaries crystal to receive help on creating their Tier 5 mana body. Not to mention, Shifeng needed to spend 7 luminaries crystals for the 100 Refinement Building's monthly upkeep. He also didn't have any intentions of running a charity. So, he definitely wouldn't be charging players the cost price of 10,000 units. For outsiders, he'd have to charge them a minimum of 15,000 or 20,000 units of 7 luminaries crystal. This was a price even the various hegemonic powers would find expensive. After Shifeng was done inspecting the second floor, he handed 10,000 units of 7 luminaries crystal to Laura and had her enter one of the training rooms to start creating her mana body. Then, he entered a different training room to experience the second floor training room's effects himself. Inside the training room, Shifeng couldn't help but be stunned after he paid the 10,000 units of 7 luminaries crystal to use the training room. Eternal energy. Unimaginably dense eternal energy. No wonder 10,000 units of 7 luminaries crystal are needed to activate this room. Just being able to stand in this eternal energy is already worth the price. The concentration of eternal energy in this room was at least 5 or 6 times greater than what was available in the first floor training rooms. Just standing in the room allowed him to experience a qualitative transformation in his brain activity. Moreover, he felt as if he was put into a constant state of enlightenment or, more specifically, all-knowing. System. Creation Assistance Mode activated. You can only activate this mode once in your lifetime. System. You have 100 assisted creation opportunities remaining. Each assisted creation will provide an ideal improvement to the mana body you create. You may only stay in the assisted creation space for a maximum of 1 natural day. If you do not use up your assisted creation opportunities in 1 natural day, your remaining opportunities will be automatically forfeited. What a pity. If more time is given, it might even be possible to learn a gold combat technique in this space. Shifeng felt a little disappointed when he saw the time limit given. The first floor's training rooms allowed players to spend up to 5 natural days in them. That was more than enough time for players to use up all 100 simulation opportunities, and players could even use their excess time to train in other things, such as combat techniques and mana techniques. With the second floor training room's superior environment, players could learn even gold combat techniques and saint rank mana techniques if given enough time. However, God's Domain's main god system obviously knew this was too good of an opportunity. Hence, the main god system gave players a choice: either use the given time to create a better mana body or improve on other things. In a situation where the creation assistance mode was present, unless a player was completely uninterested in having a better mana body, they would definitely choose the first option rather than the second one. Begin the first assisted creation. Realizing the importance of time, Shifeng promptly began his first assisted creation. In God's Domain, players needed to create a mana body that suited themselves if they wanted to step into the Tier 5 threshold. Meanwhile, the process of creating was basically using one's existing mana body as a template and coming up with methods to strengthen it. However, depending on the rank of the template used, the strengthening requirements would also differ. The higher a template mana body's rank, the lower the strengthening requirements would be. If players were to use a bronze mana body as their template, they would need to strengthen it by 500% for it to get promoted to Tier 5. However, if a gold mana body was used as a template, players would only need to strengthen it by 300% for it to reach the Tier 5 standard. This was also why it was crucial for players to obtain a high-ranking mana body at Tier 3. Of course, strengthening a Tier 3 gold mana body by 300% was only the minimum requirement to create a Tier 5 mana body. Or, more specifically, a Tier 5 bronze mana body. If players wished to create a higher-ranked Tier 5 mana body, they would need to strengthen their Tier 3 mana bodies even further. In the case of a Tier 3 epic mana body, it would have to be strengthened by 200% to qualify as a Tier 5 bronze mana body and 320% to qualify as a Tier 5 epic mana body. Although the percentage requirements were lower, the difficulty of strengthening an epic mana body was significantly greater than that of a gold mana body. So, even getting it to 320% was nigh impossible, let alone 350%, which was the minimum requirement for a Tier 5 advanced epic mana body. Needless to say, the difficulty of strengthening a Tier 3 legendary mana body was even more of a nightmare. Although it only needed to be strengthened by 150% to qualify as a Tier 5 mana body, it had to be strengthened by 200% to reach the epic rank, 240% to reach the advanced epic rank, and 270% to reach the legendary rank. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Chapter 3299, Chapter 373, Great Grandmaster. Chapter 3299, Chapter 373, Great Grandmaster. Chapter 373, Great Grandmaster. 100 Refinement Building, 2nd floor training room. After Shifeng integrated the 12-array magic world he had used to create his Tier 5 mana body during his previous life into his current mana body, the Creation Assistance mode quickly started doing its job. In less than a minute, a mana body that had perfectly integrated with the magic array he provided appeared before his eyes. System. Congratulations. You have successfully constructed a new mana body. The constructed mana body's strength is at 182% of your current mana body and has reached the Tier 5 standard. The created mana body is evaluated to be at the gold rank. Do you wish to replace your current mana body with it and get promoted to Tier 5? It managed to improve the mana flow to such an extent. Shifeng had difficulty keeping his mouth closed when he saw the system improved mana body. To reach Tier 5, players needed to create a mana body that was strong enough to alter their life rating to the Tier 5 standard, which was why Tier 5 players were typically much stronger than Tier 4 players. There was a qualitative difference in the mana bodies of the two tiers, and the difference was especially stark in the mana condensation aspect. Meanwhile, out of all the steps players needed to go through to create a Tier 5 mana body, the most troublesome step would have to be determining the flow of mana. Because players would be creating a mana body of their own, they would need to construct and integrate a significant number of magic arrays into their existing mana body. And as these magic arrays would have varying effects, they would also need varying amounts of mana supplied to them. If players wanted to ensure all of these magic arrays could function properly and efficiently, they would usually have to invest a lot of time and effort into the endeavor, much more than what they had invested when they were integrating these magic arrays with their existing mana body. Players also couldn't haphazardly decide their Tier 5 mana body's mana flow, as there would be a significant difference in the mana body's performance between partial activation and complete activation of the mana body's magic arrays. So, exactly how one could achieve complete activation was the biggest headache players faced when creating their Tier 5 mana body. However, the Creation Assistance mode took care of this problem for players. One assisted creation was essentially equivalent to or better than 100 creation attempts made by players themselves. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that the Creation Assistance mode was divine assistance. A legendary mana body truly is something. The 12-array magic world is enough to strengthen a Tier 3 epic mana body to the Tier 5 epic standard, yet it only managed to strengthen my Tier 3 legendary mana body to the Tier 5 gold standard. It seems I won't be able to use these magic arrays. Shifeng couldn't help but reveal a wry smile after he was done inspecting the mana body presented before him. The 12-array magic world he had used during his previous life was a Grandmaster mana gathering array created by a saint, and it was the key factor that allowed him to create a Tier 5 epic mana body. However, The 12-array magic world was evidently lacking for his current needs. Or, more specifically, the 12-array magic world was incapable of condensing mana that was sufficiently dense to effectively strengthen his Tier 3 legendary mana body. Although it should be possible to improve the 12-array magic world's effectiveness by restructuring it, even then, it could, at best, leave him with a Tier 5 epic mana body. It was highly unlikely he could achieve a Tier 5 advanced epic mana body with the 12-array magic world, let alone a Tier 5 legendary mana body. Going by my current mana body's standard, I'm going to have to strengthen its mana to a solid state at the very least to achieve an epic rank. Under the effects of eternal energy, Shifeng quickly understood where the mana body was lacking. Meanwhile, upon making this realization, he didn't know whether he should laugh or cry. Although he had quickly learned about his mana body's deficiencies, increasing the density of its mana was easier said than done. It was especially so if he wanted to condense it to a solid state. This was no longer something that could be accomplished by a Grandmaster magic array. Even great Grandmaster magic arrays might not necessarily be able to accomplish it. Currently, Shifeng did not have any great Grandmaster mana gathering arrays in his possession. In fact, only a handful of such magic arrays existed in the entire Greater Gods domain, and they were either in the hands of Apex powers or upper-ranking hegemonic powers that were capable of contending against Apex powers. This was because only powers of such caliber had the strength to get their hands on such magic arrays. Great Grandmaster mana gathering arrays were incomparably precious, and their rarity rivaled divine artifacts. Meanwhile, there were only two methods to obtain these magic arrays. The first method was to have a great Grandmaster magician create one, while the second method was to destroy a kingdom based in one of the 12 sanctuaries and obtain it from the kingdom's treasury. Of the two methods, the first was nothing but a joke. Firstly, great Grandmaster magicians were exceedingly rare in the Greater Gods domain, and there usually wouldn't be more than 100 in any era. Secondly, a great Grandmaster magician would need many months to develop even the simplest great Grandmaster magic array. Meanwhile, the complexity of mana gathering arrays was usually significantly higher than that of other magic arrays of the same rank. So, not only would a great Grandmaster magician require a significant amount of time to create a great Grandmaster mana gathering array, but their efforts weren't even guaranteed to pay off. In fact, their chances of success were unlikely to exceed 30%. Hence, rather than wait and hope for a great Grandmaster magician to succeed, it'd be much quicker to destroy a kingdom in the 12 sanctuaries and search for a great Grandmaster mana gathering array in the kingdom's treasury. No, I'm not out of solutions yet. Thinking up to this point, Shifeng suddenly came up with an idea to obtain a Grandmaster mana gathering array. The Ancient Abyssal Gods Legacy. The Ancient Abyssal Gods mana usage method that was recorded in the stratified Abyssal Realms Abyssal Tower was more profound than even that of saints. So, it might just be possible to create a great Grandmaster mana gathering array by referencing the Ancient Abyssal Gods Legacy. Not to mention, Shifeng had already reached the limits of a Grandmaster magician. So long as he could create a great Grandmaster magic array, he could become a great Grandmaster magician. Immediately, Shifeng started testing his theory by restructuring the magic array in the Ancient Abyssal Gods Legacy, continuously expanding it, and filling in the gaps. The act of upgrading a magic array that was inherently at the Grandmaster rank to the Great Grandmaster rank was a feat ordinary Great Grandmaster magicians wouldn't even dare to think of trying. Under normal circumstances, Shifeng wouldn't have thought of doing so, either. However, Shifeng currently had the assistance of incredibly dense eternal energy. Thanks to this assistance, he had long surpassed the average Great Grandmaster magician in mana control, mana affinity, and brain activity. 1 hour. 3 hours. 6 hours. Shifeng was met with one failure after another as time passed. However, as he continuously summarized and learned from his mistakes, the quality and effectiveness of the mana gathering array he created also grew more and more astonishing. Originally, the mana gathering array he modified could only barely condense mana into a solid state. It was also only strong enough to be integrated with roughly 1,000 magic arrays. At this standard, it could, at most, be considered a Grandmaster mana gathering array. However, the magic array quickly reached the advanced Grandmaster standard, being able to easily condense solid mana. It could also be integrated with over 2,000 other magic arrays. As expected of an ancient god's legacy, its mana usage method is a world unto itself. Though, the requirement it has for mana control is also absurdly high. If not for my current environment, I doubt I can even move 2,000 magic arrays with it. As Shifeng kept adding more magic arrays to the mana gathering array, the difficulty of maintaining control over all these magic arrays also continuously increased. Even so, he couldn't help but grow excited since his proficiency at manipulating mana also continuously improved. Meanwhile, the better he got at controlling mana, the more magic arrays he could control simultaneously. 2,600. 2,800. 3,000. After Shifeng spent his 20th hour in the training room, he successfully increased the number of magic arrays he could control to 3,333. At the same time, the sound of a system notification entered his ears. System, congratulations. You have successfully created a Great Grandmaster Magic Array. You have been promoted to a Great Grandmaster Magician. Rewarding Great Grandmaster Emblem, 5 levels, and 20 free legacy skill points. System, do you wish to make a universal announcement? TL notes. Basically, the following is what I gathered from this chapter T3 mana body, template, plus many magic arrays of varying functions plus mana gathering array, mana flow power supply, equals T5 mana body 2. Better mana gathering array equals more magic arrays equals better T5 mana body. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Chapter 3300, Chapter 374, Great Grandmaster Yifeng? Chapter 3300, Chapter 374, Great Grandmaster Yifeng? Chapter 374, Great Grandmaster Yifeng? TL notes. Changed universal announcement to realm-wide announcement. A realm-wide announcement. The system notification stunned Shifeng. A Great Grandmaster Magician. Out of the many subclasses in the game, the Magician subclass was the most favored by combat players. On top of being able to create magic scrolls, the Magician subclass also allowed players to gain a better grasp over mana. The subclass was especially useful for magical class players. In fact, the subclass was a must-have for magical class players since it let them have a better understanding of magic arrays and gave them an easier time casting spells. Only, unlike other subclasses, most players would hit an unbreachable wall once they reached the Grandmaster rank for the Magician subclass. If players wished to become a Great Grandmaster Magician, they would need to create a Great Grandmaster Magician. Meanwhile, to accomplish this feat, players would first have to do a lot of research on Great Grandmaster magic arrays. However, Great Grandmaster magic arrays had already become a lost technology ever since the Great Ancient War. Outside of the 12 sanctuaries, finding Great Grandmaster magic arrays was nigh impossible. Their rarity rivaled fragmented divine artifacts. Hence, it was almost impossible for players to get their hands on a large number of Great Grandmaster magic arrays to research. It was also why there were so few Great Grandmaster magicians in the Greater Gods domain. Originally, Shifeng had only thought of attempting to create a Great Grandmaster magic array. After all, this was the only solution he could think of to create a Tier 5 legendary mana body. However, he never thought he would actually succeed. He couldn't believe he had just become a Great Grandmaster Magician, an existence that wouldn't number more than 100 in any era in the Greater Gods domain. While Shifeng was in a daze, he received another system notification. System, do you wish to make a realm-wide announcement? Smiling, Shifeng said, make the announcement. Realm-wide announcements were extremely rare in the Greater Gods domain. Normally, players could only trigger a realm-wide announcement after completing a main storyline quest in the Greater Gods domain or making great achievements such as slaying one of the Greater Gods domain's calamities. Meanwhile, realm-wide announcements were a great way to increase one's fame. Now that Shifeng was given the opportunity to spread his fame across the Starlight Realm, he naturally wouldn't refuse it. After all, this would make it a lot more convenient for him to do various things. System, do you wish to make the announcement using your current false identity of Yifeng? Yes. Shifeng agreed to the prompt without hesitation. Although he could use his true identity to announce his great grandmaster status, doing so would expose his ability to travel freely between worlds. Rather than invite unnecessary trouble for himself, he would be better off announcing his achievement under a false identity. Very few people could see through the sacred phantom ring's disguise effect, anyway. Immediately, a system announcement echoed throughout the entire Starlight Realm. System announcement: congratulations to Yi Feng on becoming the first person to reach the rank of Great Grandmaster Magician in 100 years, rewarding 20 Starlight Realm reputation points. The announcement repeated 3 times, stupefying many players across the Starlight Realm. Someone got promoted into a Great Grandmaster Magician? Amazing. Incredible. I always thought players couldn't become Great Grandmaster Magicians. I didn't think someone would actually succeed. This is beyond incredible. This is a Great Grandmaster Magician we are talking about. There aren't even 100 of such existences in our current era, and every one of these existences is a big shot that even Apex Powers will try to recruit as honorary elders. Isn't that just nonsense? We are only talking about a magician here. Even if the various Apex Powers place great importance on Great Grandmaster Magicians, there's no way these powers would use an honorary elder position as an enticement. That position holds as much authority as the Vice Guild Leader position. Even the helmsmen of conglomerates will have to show respect to the honorary elders of Apex Powers. How ignorant of you! Don't you know that Great Grandmaster Magicians can already draw Great Grandmaster magic arrays? Those are magic arrays used to safeguard Outer Realm fortresses and cities. Do you have any idea how big of a difference there is between a stronghold that's protected by a Great Grandmaster magic array and a stronghold that isn't protected by one? 10 times. There will be a tenfold difference at the very minimum. 10? Isn't that too much of an exaggeration? Not at all. Grandmaster magic arrays can, at best, reach the Tier 5 standard, but Great Grandmaster magic arrays can reach the Tier 6 standard. Any city protected by a Great Grandmaster defensive magic array can easily withstand a bombardment of Tier 6 spells. With the support of such a defensive magic array, the various powers can drastically reduce the number of Tier 6 experts they dispatch to protect these foreign installations. They can then use the additional manpower to do other things or establish new Outer Realm fortresses and cities. So, do you still think Great Grandmaster Magicians aren't incredible? Many players expressed their confusion toward the latest system announcement, failing to comprehend the significance of a Great Grandmaster Magician. However, when the Starlight Realm's various powers saw the system announcement, they instantly went into an uproar. Ordinary players might not know the value of Great Grandmaster Magicians, but the Starlight Realm's various powers knew that the appearance of a Great Grandmaster Magician was a major event that could rewrite the status quo in the Starlight Realm. Starlight Realm, Starlight Empire, Starlight Holy City. The Starlight Holy City was the most prosperous city in the Starlight Realm, with a player population of 1 billion. Practically all powers in the Starlight Realm wished to secure themselves a place in this city. However, due to the Holy City's limited space, even upper-ranking hegemonic powers had difficulty securing themselves a spot in the city. Currently, on the top floor of a humongous battle arena in the Holy City, 2 level 220, Tier 6 players clad in legendary equipment sets and wielding legendary weapons were duking it out with one another. The strength both parties exhibited closely rivaled Tier 6 gods of the same level. While these two players were dueling each other, many players cheered and applauded as they spectated the match. Among these spectators, many were titled experts who had already reached Tier 6. As expected of the 7 Luminaries Alliance's 7 Luminaries League. Even the matches in the A-League are already such a spectacle to behold. I really cannot imagine what kind of monsters would be in the S-League. It's a pity the Starlight Realm isn't a higher realm. At best, we can only receive the broadcast of A-Leagues here. It can't be helped. Our realm has never managed to get into the top 100 in the Realm Wars. After losing to the Sky River Realm last time, it became even more difficult for us to get into the top 100. While the people on the spectator stands were discussing the ongoing match, a woman with ethereal beauty quietly observed the match from a VIP room on the 2nd floor. However, the woman shifted her attention away from the stage when a level 220, Tier 6 Guardian Knight entered the room. Did you find anything about Yi Feng? The woman asked. Young miss, I have already mobilized all available manpower to investigate this person, but we have yet to acquire any reliable information thus far, the Guardian Knight answered. If other people could see how respectfully this Tier 6 Guardian Knight behaved to the woman, they would definitely be given a fright. After all, the Guardian Knight was fully clad in legendary equipment and radiated strength rivaling Tier 6 gods. However, the two female bodyguards standing next to the woman were unfazed by this situation. Fry, the Galaxy Conglomerate's fourth princess. This name could make any upper-ranking hegemonic power in the Starlight Realm tremble with fear. Even Tier 6 saints would have to behave deferentially to her, let alone experts that only rivaled Tier 6 gods. Still nothing. Fry frowned, her tone growing a little cold. It's not that we didn't find any information at all. It's just that the information we found is a little too unreliable, the Guardian Knight hurriedly corrected himself. According to the insider information we collected from the Seven Luminaries Alliance, the name Yi Feng has appeared in the miniature ancient world that you have previously visited, young miss. Only, I don't think that person is likely to be. The same name has appeared in that miniature ancient world before? Growing curious, Fry asked, who is he? Anxiously, the Guardian Knight answered, he is the former guild leader of a second-rate guild named Shadow. At the same time, he is also Zero Wing's current acting guild leader. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Chapter 3301, Chapter 375, Level 5 Affinity. Chapter 3301, Chapter 375, Level 5 Affinity. Chapter 375, Level 5 Affinity. Zero Wing's acting guild leader? Fry was a little surprised by the Guardian Knight's answer. Are you talking about the Zero Wing that killed Dira? Yes, that Zero Wing. The Guardian Knight nodded. The news of Dira getting killed had long since spread across the entire Starlight Realm, and any power operating in the Starlight Realm would know about it. It was especially so for the powers based near the Sea of Giants now that the Divine Seal Saint had sent the Wind Seal Commander, one of the 4 seals, there to await the opening of the miniature ancient world's world passage. Have that person in the Seven Luminaries Alliance carefully look into this matter. If it turns out to be true, this matter is going to be interesting, Fry said, her lips curling up a little. But be sure to do things secretly. We must not let a third party know about this matter. Rest assured, young miss. That person is a confidant trained by the Galaxy Conglomerate. He will never leak this information to other powers, the Guardian Knight assured. Good. You should know how important a great Grandmaster Magician is to the Galaxy Conglomerate. If any mistakes occur, you won't be able to afford the consequences, Fry calmly said. Understood. The Guardian Knight hurriedly nodded, cold sweat rolling down his forehead. I won't disappoint you on this matter, young miss. While Fry was looking into the latest great Grandmaster Magician going by the name of Yi Feng, the Starlight Realm's various hegemonic powers and conglomerate were also frantically looking into this person. They even offered to give anyone who could provide useful information related to Yi Feng a permanent resident status in a first-tier city. When this news spread, the entire Starlight Realm instantly went into an uproar. For ordinary players, just the opportunity to gain permanent residence in a third-tier city was already an unattainable dream. As for permanent residence in a first-tier city, that was something not even mental strength grandmasters would dare to think of obtaining. At most, they could afford to visit a first-tier city for a few days every now and then. Yet, now, there was an opportunity to gain permanent residency in a first-tier city simply by providing information on Yi Feng. How could everyone not be shocked? While the Starlight Realm's players and powers were busy looking into the player named Yi Feng, Shifeng was focused on creating his Tier 5 mana body. After becoming a great Grandmaster Magician, Shifeng not only noticed his concentration undergoing an evolutionary change, but he also felt his elemental ascending to a new level. Or, more specifically, the great Grandmaster emblem he wore had increased his elemental affinity by 1 level. Great Grandmaster emblem, a magician emblem exclusive to Black Flame. When worn, it increases the wearer's elemental affinity by 1 level, up to a maximum of level 6. The Magician class's Great Grandmaster emblem is truly incredible. Now that my elemental affinity has reached level 5, I only need to expend half as much concentration to manipulate solid mana. Shifeng grew ecstatic as he integrated the Great Grandmaster mana gathering arrays he created with his mana body one after another. Elemental affinity was crucial for players in controlling mana. Normally, players' elemental affinity would only be at level 1, while gifted individuals could reach level 2. Compared to players with only level 1 affinity, players with level 2 affinity would have an easier time perceiving and manipulating the various elements. Although elemental affinity could be artificially increased using various methods, such as using tools and improving one's mana body, there was a limit to the effectiveness of such methods. Even with a legendary mana body, Shifeng only managed to raise his elemental affinity to the level 4 standard. Level 4 also happened to be the highest standard Shifeng achieved during his previous life, and he had achieved that standard after relying on various tools. This was also the limit for most Tier 6 experts. So, the fact that the Great Grandmaster emblem for magicians could elevate his elemental affinity to level 5 was incredible. This effect alone made it as valuable as a fragmented divine artifact. In less than half an hour, Shifeng finished constructing a mana body that was fully made up of Great Grandmaster mana gathering arrays. Start the assisted creation. After looking at the mana body he constructed, Shifeng chose to activate the 100 Refinement Building's Creation Assistance mode. This time, the 100 Refinement Building seemingly got stimulated as divine runes appeared all over the training room Shifeng was in. At the same time, the density of eternal energy in the room plummeted as if to fuel the assisted creation this time. 1 minute. 2 minutes. 3 minutes. 10 minutes later, the sound of a system notification entered Shifeng's ears. System. Congratulations. You have successfully constructed a new mana body. The constructed mana body's strength is at 224% of your current mana body and has reached the Tier 5 standard. The created mana body is evaluated to be at the epic rank. Do you wish to replace your current mana body with it and get promoted to Tier 5? Sure enough, I was right. Shifeng's eyes brightened when he saw the system notification. The fact that he managed to achieve the epic rank on his first attempt at using the Great Grandmaster mana gathering array to create his Tier 5 mana body meant that he had made the right judgment. Now, all he needed to do was continuously optimize his mana body structure, and he should have no problems elevating his Tier 5 mana body to the legendary rank. Immediately, Shifeng began varying the number of mana gathering arrays he used across his mana body, trying to improve his mana body's mana transmission efficiency and mana density as much as possible. Meanwhile, the more he optimized his mana body, the stronger it became. 230%. 235%. 240%. After numerous experiments, Shifeng hit a bottleneck after reaching 255%. It seems this is my current limit. Shifeng revealed a wry smile as he looked at the mana body he had created. The difficulty of achieving a Tier 5 legendary mana body was much greater than he imagined. The reason he could no longer improve his mana body any further wasn't that the mana gathering array had become a limiting factor. Instead, it was because of his control over mana. Currently, he could only manipulate up to 64 Great Grandmaster mana gathering arrays simultaneously. Meanwhile, after integrating 64 Great Grandmaster mana gathering arrays into his existing mana body and optimizing its structure as much as possible, he only ended up with a mana body that was 255% stronger than his current mana body. In other words, it was only at the Tier 5 Advanced Epic Standard. If he wanted to create a stronger Tier 5 mana body, he would have to increase the number of Great Grandmaster mana gathering arrays in his mana body. While Shifeng was looking for ways to further optimize his mana body's structure, he suddenly received a system notification. Regional System Announcement: a miniature Ancient Worlds world passage will soon open. All kingdoms and empires situated near the Sea of Giants are advised to prepare to resist the incoming beast tide. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Chapter 3302, Chapter 376, World Passage opens. Chapter 3302, Chapter 376, World Passage opens. Chapter 376. World Passage opens. Miniature ancient world, Thunder Fortress. When the gigantic door 10,000 yards away from the Thunder Fortress opened, all the players gathered in the Thunder Fortress boarded their respective ships and swarmed toward the gate. In no time, a gigantic fleet of over 100,000 ships could be seen sailing toward the distant gate. A fleet of such size could fight against even an army of several million sea monsters. It could also easily annihilate any maritime empire. However, the fleet of 100,000 plus ships looked comically small when gathered before the gigantic door. The bottom half of the door in question was submerged in the ocean, while the upper half rose well beyond the clouds. Its width was also beyond absurd, easily surpassing the width of the entire Thunder Fortress by many times. When the miniature ancient world's native players saw this door, they couldn't help but be deeply shocked. They didn't think the World Gate, which served as a connection point for the World Passage, would be such a spectacular sight. Amidst the 100,000 plus ships, a fleet led by one common warship and supported by several bronze speedboats and several dozen advanced speedboats could be seen carefully making its way to the World Gate. Meanwhile, standing at the helm of the common warship was a level 137, Tier 4 elderly man carrying a greatsword on his back. In the current miniature ancient world, there was no native expert player who wouldn't recognize this old man. 1,000 Swords. He was the great elder of the Super Guild World Dominators and one of their god's domain's few Tier 6 experts. Although Tier 6 experts became insignificant along with the myriad world's descent, the strength 1,000 Swords could exhibit in the miniature ancient world was still impressive. In one instance, the fleet 1,000 Swords led had defeated 2 foreign fleets out in open water. At the time, 1,000 Swords himself had also single-handedly held back 4 fourth-floor experts. According to rumors, 1,000 Swords was now only one step away from reaching the standard of titled experts. It should be known that in the current miniature ancient world, even the various hegemonic powers would only have 1 or 2 titled experts under their command, while most superpowers didn't even have titled experts under their command. So, 1,000 Swords' presence had allowed world dominators to become a superpower that was only second to the various hegemonic powers in the miniature ancient world. All of you, be extremely careful once we are inside the World Passage. Do not get washed away by the beast tide. Any ship caught by itself will be quickly devoured by the void creatures. 1,000 Swords said, issuing a command to all ships in the fleet through the team chat. Finally. We are finally going to enter the greater god's domain. Gu Iran, who had similarly reached Tier 4, revealed an excited expression as he looked at the nearing world gate. Don't get too excited, Iran, 1,000 Swords said as he glanced at his student. The World Passage is a very dangerous place. Based on the information we've collected, even the weakest void creature in a World Passage will be at the Grand Lord rank. There will even be plenty of mythic and superior mythic void creatures mixed among them. Also, our ultimate goal might be to enter the greater god's domain, but we also have to try to earn as many association contribution points as possible. Don't worry, teacher. I've prepared over a dozen Tier 4 magic scrolls for those void creatures. We can definitely earn a ton of contribution points, Gu Iran confidently said as he patted the spatial bag on his waist. So long as one bothered to do a little research, anyone would know about the welfare provided by the Greater Gods Domain's Adventurers Association to players of isolated God's Domain. For 2 days after a World Passage opened, players who entered the World Passage could earn association contribution points by killing void creatures in the World Passage. Then, players could use the points they earned to exchange immortal weapons and equipment from the Adventurers Association. If players collected enough points, they could even exchange for the incomparably legacy guidances. These were all things that would let isolated players have an easier time settling in the Greater God's Domain. Meanwhile, Gu Iran had done a lot of preparation in anticipation of the World Passage's opening. Of the Tier 4 magic scrolls he prepared, every one of them held a large-scale destruction spell. Although these spells were incapable of one-shotting Tier 4 mythic monsters, they were strong enough to heavily injure mythic monsters. So long as these monsters were killed later on, the system would judge him as having made a big contribution to the kill and award him at least 10% of the monster's points. This was an incredibly effective and efficient way of earning contribution points. It was significantly better than trying to kill one void creature with a large group of players. With over a dozen Tier 4 large-scale destruction spells, he would have no problem heavily injuring over 1,000 monsters. Even if he only earned a few points from each monster, that would still be several thousand contribution points. If he was lucky, he might even earn over 10,000 contribution points. Based on the information World Dominators had collected, 1,000 points could be exchanged for an epic immortal weapon, 3,000 points could be exchanged for a Tier 5 Demigod's Legacy Guidance, 5,000 points could be exchanged for a Tier 6 NPC's Legacy Guidance, 10,000 points could be exchanged for a Tier 6 God's Legacy Guidance, and 20,000 points could be exchanged for a legacy that provided a perfect experience of a gold combat technique's use. Setting aside the perfect experience of a gold combat technique, just receiving a Tier 6 God's Legacy Guidance would be of significant help to him when he challenged his Tier 5 and Tier 6 promotions in the future. After all Tier 6 gods possessed extraordinary mana bodies with extremely high reference value for players. If he could create a Tier 5 mana body that reached the epic rank, he could instantly reach the peak of his life. While Gu Iran was fantasizing about earning 10,000 association contribution points and exchanging them for a Tier 6 God's Legacy Guidance, Thousand Swords suddenly tensed up as he looked at a fleet of ships coming from behind. Then, he hurriedly shouted, "All ships, turn to the left and open up a path." World Dominators members couldn't help but grow confused when they heard Thousand Swords' command. Then, while carrying out the command, they curiously turned around and looked at the ships sailing up from behind them. At this time, a fleet of fewer than 20 ships was sailing up to World Dominators' fleet. However, despite its small size, the fleet was by no means weak. This was because the fleet was led by one advanced warship and 6 common warships and supported by a dozen bronze speedboats. Some hegemonic powers didn't even have such a high-quality fleet. Meanwhile, as this small fleet swiftly made its way to the World Gate, all of the other fleets in its path promptly sailed aside and opened a path for it, none daring to sail in this small fleet's way. This was because the ships of this fleet carried the guild emblem of the Flower of 7 Sins. Is this the treatment for the number 1 genius? As the Flower of 7 Sins fleet got closer, Gu Iran could see 2 female assassins standing at the helm of the advanced warship sailing at the front of the fleet. Of these 2 assassins, one was Death Omen, a former Tier 6 player who had shaken their god's domain with her name in the past, while the other was Thousand Scars, the current number 1 genius among the miniature Ancient World's native players. When Gu Iran watched as Thousand Scars sailed past World Dominator's fleet, he couldn't help but feel a little envious of her. Ever since Thousand Scars got chosen by the Paimon conglomerate, even the various hegemonic powers had to behave respectfully around her and the Flower of 7 Sins. This allowed the Flower of 7 Sins to develop smoothly and rapidly in the miniature Ancient World. A good example of the Flower of 7 Sins' rapid development would be the 1 advanced warship and 6 common warships in its fleet. With such naval prowess, the Flower of 7 Sins wouldn't need more than a few minutes to annihilate World Dominator's entire fleet. Meanwhile, with such a fleet under its command, it goes without saying the Flower of 7 Sins could kill void creatures in the World Passage very effectively. Even if he had 100 Tier 4 magic scrolls in his possession, he still wouldn't be a match for the Flower of 7 Sins fleet. After all, the advanced warship's main cannons were just as strong as Tier 4 large-scale destruction spells. Moreover, so long as these cannons were supplied with enough magic crystals, they could fire an infinite number of times. Shortly after the Flower of 7 Sins fleet entered the World Passage, a fleet made of 5 ships also made its way up to the World Gate. When this fleet of 5 ships appeared, it instantly attracted the attention of all other fleets present. This was because all 5 of this fleet's ships were bronze warships. Then, upon seeing the guild emblem on these 5 bronze warships, everyone couldn't help but gape in shock. Crap! Isn't this Zero Wing? If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Chapter 3303, Chapter 377, Void Gods. Chapter 3303, Chapter 377, Void Gods. Chapter 377, Void gods. The sight of the six-winged emblem on the 5 bronze warships dumbfounded the various powers gathered before the World Gate. Bronze warships were very recognizable. This was because bronze warships were a cut above common and advanced warships. Moreover, they came with twofold Tier 4 defensive magic arrays that could stop the attacks of even superior mythic monsters. It was no exaggeration to say that one bronze warship was enough to make up an entire fleet by itself. A force of 5 bronze warships was something none of the various hegemonic powers dared to think of having in the miniature ancient world. Yet, now, it was revealed that this unbelievable fleet originated from Zero Wing, a guild that hadn't even come into contact with the greater god's domain yet. How is this possible? Gu Iran wore a complicated look on his face when he saw several familiar figures standing on Zero Wing's 5 bronze warships. Apart from Black Flame, the man who had killed him once before, he also spotted Rampant Blade, a former member of the now-defunct Shadow Guild. He even saw Wu Lingling, a newcomer who had made a splash during the newcomer competition of Jin High City's God's Domain Academy, and Lin Yaoyu, the director of Jin High City's God's Domain Academy. Currently, not only did all of these people reach Tier 4 already, but the way they carried themselves was completely different. It was obvious that their current combat standards were drastically greater than before. If these people combined their current strength with the contribution points they could accumulate with the help of 5 bronze warships, it wasn't hard to imagine how big of an improvement they would have once they entered the greater god's domain. So what if Zero Wing has 5 bronze warships? Dao Yue on the side said, curling her lips. All they're doing is putting up pointless resistance. Once the world passage is open, the Paimon conglomerate will definitely send its army from the greater god's domain. At that time, Zero Wing won't even dare to enter the world passage, let alone the greater god's domain. You're right. They can only enter the world passage during its initial opening before they'll have to quickly withdraw from it. Gu Iran nodded in agreement, his mood lightening significantly. The matter of Zero Wing offending the Paimon conglomerate was no secret in the miniature ancient world. The various powers even knew that the Paimon conglomerate had already mobilized its forces to barricade the other side of the world passage. With Paimon's army blocking the world passage's exit, Zero Wing wouldn't dare to enter the greater god's domain at all. If it did, it would instantly suffer annihilation at the hands of the Paimon conglomerate's Tier 6 army. All of Zero Wing's members would also suffer soul annihilation and be prohibited from logging into God's domain for the rest of their lives. Moreover, even if Zero Wing chose not to enter the greater God's domain, the Paimon conglomerate would still be sending many well-equipped Tier 4 experts into the miniature ancient world. At that time, Zero Wing would still meet its end. This was also why most of the miniature ancient world's native powers had chosen to cease any and all dealings they had with Zero Wing. At this time, Gu Iran and Dao Yue weren't the only ones to have such thoughts about Zero Wing. The members of the various other powers also deemed Zero Wing's actions as putting up a pointless struggle. The world passage's opening didn't only allow the miniature ancient world's players to travel to the greater god's domain. It also allowed the greater god's domain's players to enter the miniature ancient world. Meanwhile, with the help of a bronze speedboat, it wouldn't take more than a day's travel to cross the entire world passage. The travel time would be even shorter if speedboats above the bronze rank were used. The only problem was the void creatures in the world passage. Without a sufficiently strong fleet, traveling across the world passage would be no different than suicide. However, with the Paimon conglomerate's strength, it probably wouldn't take more than a day before its Tier 4 army could cross the world passage to reach the miniature ancient world. In other words, Zero Wing had less than a day left to strut around in the miniature ancient world. However, after the various powers entered the world passage, they quickly forgot about Zero Wing. This was because greeting them in the calm sea beyond the world gate was a swarm of void creatures of illogical proportions. What awaited the various powers beyond the world gate wasn't a swarm of 1,000,000 monsters. Even describing the swarm in the millions would be an understatement. At a glance, the number of void creatures in the calm sea was easily in the tens of millions. Moreover, even the weakest among them was at the Tier 4 mythic rank, while many of them were at the superior mythic rank. What's going on? Shouldn't the weakest monsters here be Grand Lords? The fleets that had just entered the world passage panicked when they saw the fleets getting destroyed in the distance. Even the top adventurer teams originating from the greater god's domain were distressed by this situation. Void Sea Serpent, Void Creature, Mythic, Level 142 HP 20 billion, Void Sea Dragon, Void Creature, Superior Mythic, Level 145 HP 50 billion. The average Void Creature had significantly greater HP and defense than the average sea monster. Normally, killing even one mythic-ranked Void Creature would require the joint effort of one common warship and several dozen advanced speedboats. Yet, now, even the weakest monster in this sea was a Tier 4 mythic Void Sea Serpent. If a few dozen of these Void Sea Serpents attacked together, even a common warship wouldn't last more than a few exchanges. Meanwhile, if players were to lose the support of their ships in this environment devoid of mana, their combat power would plummet. At that time, even flying would become a problem, let alone fighting. This was also why transportation tools were far more important than individual strength when it came to traveling between worlds. While the various powers were panicking, some players with excellent eyesight suddenly noticed the silhouette of an island floating in the distance. An island? Why is there an island here? Many players couldn't help but grow confused when they saw the floating island in the distance. The inside of the world passage was supposed to be an empty void, so a floating island shouldn't exist here. Moreover, the island even looked like it was inhabited by people, making its presence here even stranger. After all, apart from void creatures, other creatures were incapable of staying in the void for long periods of time. Meanwhile, when Thousand Scars saw the island, she suddenly thought of something as she exclaimed, "Void gods! Void gods! What do you mean?" Death Omen looked at Thousand Scars in confusion. Void gods are a race of gods who live in the void, Thousand Scars excitedly explained. I've read about them in the Paimon Conglomerate's database. Rumor has it that void gods are constantly wandering about in the void, and people can occasionally see the islands they live on in the void. Meanwhile, it is rumored that void gods possess legacies passed down by ancient gods. More importantly, the settlements of void gods are also the only places in the greater god's domain where players can change classes into a void saint. In the greater god's domain, void saints are labeled invincible when fighting in the void, and even dragons of the same tier are no match for them. Even dragons of the same tier are not a match. Death Omen was surprised to hear Thousand Scars' explanation. There were many hidden classes in God's domain, but none were known to be able to rival dragons, let alone surpass them. It should be known that dragons were an apex race and the symbol of destruction in God's domain. Even in the greater God's domain, adult dragons were akin to natural disasters. If she could class change into a void saint. While Thousand Scars was explaining to Death Omen about void gods and void saints, 5 figures emerged from the leading ship of the Paimon Conglomerate's fleet and rapidly made their way toward the distant island. Of these 5 figures, one of them was Dira, while the remaining 4 were the 4 Beast Warriors. Currently, all 4 of the Beast Warriors have already become bona fide Tier 5 players. Meanwhile, thanks to the 4 Beast Warriors opening a path, Dira could effortlessly approach the distant floating island, the sight causing the various powers stuck on their ships to grow envious. Unfortunately, there was nothing they could do about their envy. Currently, the Paimon Conglomerate was the only power that could afford to produce Tier 5 players. For everyone else, all they could do was slowly sail to the floating island in their ships. When Carsio of the Glimmer Adventurer team saw Dira's group fast approaching the floating island, he anxiously looked at Shafong and said, "This can't continue, Guild Leader Black Flame. You and the commander should go ahead without us. Otherwise, Dira will be the first to enter the island at this rate." The other members of Glimmer nodded in agreement. The Void Saint legacy was extraordinary even in the greater god's domain. Others might not know what the Void Saint class represented, but they did. In a situation where they didn't know whether the Void Saint legacy would be limited in number, they absolutely could not let Dira reach the floating island before them. That won't be necessary. Shafong faintly smiled in response to Carsio's anxiety. All of us will go there together. All of us. Carsio and the others were on the verge of being rendered speechless by Shafong. With the strength of 5 bronze warships, How were they supposed to overtake 4 Tier 5 experts? Just as Cassio was about to say something else, Shafong took out a pendant from his bag and chanted the incantation engraved on it. Immediately, a magic array with a radius of more than 100 meters appeared in the void. Then, a dark dragon measuring over 100 meters in length emerged from this magic array, the dragon having a life aura so terrifying that it caused even the nearby void creatures to back away. A dragon. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Chapter 3304, Chapter 378, Legendary Mount. Chapter 3304, Chapter 378, Legendary Mount. Chapter 378, Legendary Mount. As Dira's group of 5 flew increasingly closer to the island above the Void Sea, the various hegemonic powers also started advancing toward the island at all costs. Faster. Move faster. Even if we can't reach the island before Dira, we should still reach it before the other powers. Although the various hegemonic powers didn't have detailed information on Void Gods, they knew plenty about the Void Saint class. Or, more specifically, anyone who had reached their standards would know about the hidden class whether they wanted to or not. This was because every hegemonic power would at least have 1 or 2 Tier 6 experts becoming an official participant in the 7 Luminaries League, and anyone who became an official participant in the League would also become a core member of the 7 Luminaries Alliance. This, in turn, would let them learn about the person known as Divine Eye, the current youngest Grand Elder of the 7 Luminaries Alliance. Meanwhile, Divine Eye's class was none other than the Void Saint. It should be known that the 7 Luminaries Alliance was one of the strongest powers in the Greater Gods domain. Even mighty conglomerates would have to bow their heads in front of the Alliance. The 7 Luminaries Alliance was controlled by the Senate, which consisted of only 12 people. These 12 individuals stood at the very apex of the Greater Gods domain. At the same time, they also represented the Greater Gods domain's apex combat power. Divine Eye was someone who managed to become one of these 12 individuals before even reaching the age of 50. Meanwhile, the main reason Divine Eye managed to accomplish this feat was due to his Void Saint class. Otherwise, he would still have to strive for several more decades before he could become a member of the Senate. Indeed, this was the power of the Void Saint class. However, what made the Void Saint class truly fearsome wasn't the fact that it could exhibit tremendous combat power in the void. Instead, it was the fact that the class wasn't unique. Because the Void Saint class wasn't unique, the number of people who could acquire it wasn't limited to just one. Of course, obtaining the Void Saint class was an incredible challenge. This was because the settlement of Void Gods did not stay in one place. Instead, their settlements would randomly drift about in the void, and even a titanic existence like the 7 Luminaries Alliance could only rely on luck to find the Void God settlement. However, so long as players managed to come across the settlement of Void Gods, their chances of becoming a Void Saint would instantly increase to a minimum of 50%. I truly didn't think the farce of getting me to earn contribution points would actually lead me to encounter the settlement of Void God. Saint 9 thought as he and Calgaran's Tier 4 team were frantically making their way to the distant floating island on their flying mounts. Void Saint. So long as he could become a Void Saint, he would instantly be strong enough to defeat all of the ancient River Kingdom's paragons. Even becoming the Starlight Realm's strongest paragon wouldn't be out of the question. It seems my chances are going to be bleak. Thousand Scars thought as she enviously looked at the several 100-man teams of Tier 4 players flying toward the Void God settlement. There were far too many Void Sea Serpents and Void Sea Dragons in the way of the floating island. Without Tier 5 combatants, it was nigh impossible to safely reach the island in a short amount of time. Although the Flower of Seven Sins had over 100 Tier 4 experts in its fleet, none possessed strength at the Tier 5 standard. This remained true even after they factored in the use of magic arrays. So, the Flower of Seven Sins members could only rely on their advanced warship to advance bit by bit. However, while Thousand Scars was busy envying paragons like Saint 9 and Trekt, a dragon's roar suddenly sounded from a distance, the roar instantly petrifying the Void Sea Serpents and Void Sea Dragons. A dragon? Before Thousand Scars could determine where the dragon's roar came from, A gigantic figure suddenly flew across the advanced warship she was on, the speed of the figure rivaling Tier 6 players. Although it was only an instant, 1,000 Scars, as a Tier 4 expert, still managed to catch a glimpse of this gigantic figure's appearance. It was a dark dragon with a body measuring over 100 meters in length. While 1,000 Scars was wondering why a dragon would appear in this place, she got a better look at the dragon, and she couldn't help but be dumbfounded by what she saw. It turned out that the dragon wasn't by itself. Instead, a group of people was riding on the dragon's back, and 1,000 Scars was incredibly familiar with this group. I must be dreaming. Yes, I must be dreaming. 1,000 Scars muttered in denial as she rubbed her eyes before taking another look at the dragon flying into the distance. Dragons were apex existences in God's domain, and the appearance of one could cause a huge commotion in any location. So, how could Zero Wings members possibly be riding atop a dragon's back? If what she just saw wasn't a hallucination, then there could only be one explanation for it: she was still fast asleep. No, you didn't see wrongly, Scars. Those are indeed Zero Wings members, Death Omen said, similarly shocked by what she just saw. While the various hegemonic powers were feeling proud of themselves for owning a bronze warship in the miniature ancient world, Zero Wing had already found itself a dragon to ride on. That can't possibly be a real dragon, right, Big Sis Omen? 1,000 Scars asked Death Omen in a whisper. Dragons were extremely rare in God's domain, and very few players had actually seen one in person. However, Death Omen was one of the Flower of Seven Sins commanders. Not only had she seen real dragons, but she had even slain them before. So, if 1,000 Scars had to name someone knowledgeable about dragons, it would definitely have to be Death Omen. Meanwhile, after pondering for a moment, Death Omen firmly said, "That isn't a real dragon. A real dragon is much more terrifying than that. Merely standing in the presence of a Tier 4 dragon is enough to suffocate and petrify ordinary Tier 4 experts." 1,000 Scars immediately felt relieved when she heard Death Omen's answer. Dragons were akin to natural disasters in God's domain. They were also known to be invincible among opponents of the same tier. If Zero Wing truly did manage to tame a Tier 4 dragon, the situation in the miniature ancient world would become very different in the future. It should be known that contracted monsters could be promoted to higher tiers. If Zero Wing truly did own a Tier 4 dragon and managed to promote it to Tier 5, not even the Paimon conglomerate could do anything against Zero Wing in the miniature ancient world. After all, Tier 6 players entering the miniature ancient world would be subjected to the miniature ancient world suppression. They could, at most, exhibit power at the standard of Tier 5 players. In that case, how were they supposed to fight against a Tier 5 dragon? While I can confirm that thing isn't a dragon, before 1,000 Scars could feel relieved for too long, Death Omen suddenly revealed a wry smile as she said, "If my guess is correct, that thing is likely to be a legendary mount. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible." Chapter 3305, Chapter 379, Laura's Sword. Chapter 3305, Chapter 379, Laura's Sword. Chapter 379, Laura's Sword. A legendary mount? 1,000 Scars fell into a daze when she heard Death Omen's words. Is this the reason for his confidence? Flying mounts were incredibly rare. They were so rare that even Tier 6 experts would have difficulty getting their hands on an extraordinary flying mount in the greater God's domain, let alone legendary flying mounts. Throughout the entire Starlight Realm's history, no more than 100 legendary flying mounts have been recorded. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that legendary flying mounts were rarer than dragons. The value of a legendary flying mount also wasn't the least bit inferior to a contracted Tier 4 or Tier 5 dragon. Compared to a contracted Tier 4 or Tier 5 dragon, a legendary flying mount had a much greater chance of getting promoted to Tier 6. It should be that a single Tier 6 flying mount had enough HP and destructive power to rival several dozen Tier 6 players. Even a Tier 6 expert clad in a legendary equipment set and wielding a legendary equipment could only hope to match a Tier 6 flying mount. Moreover, this was only under the assumption that the Tier 6 expert was fighting in the greater God's domain or their native world. If players tried to fight in a foreign world, they would be subjected to the world's suppression. Under this suppression, a Tier 6 expert clad in a complete legendary equipment set and wielding a legendary weapon could, at best, match a native Tier 6 expert wielding a legendary weapon. Needless to say, they'd be of no threat to a Tier 6 flying mount in such a weakened state. Normally, so long as a power owned a Tier 6 flying mount, even conglomerates would have difficulty dealing with said power unless they had the strength to destroy an entire god's domain. However, in the greater god's domain, few powers possessed such strength. While Thousand Scars was in a daze, Zero Wings members couldn't help but grow ecstatic as they rode on the mutated Frostflame Phantom Dragon. "You're amazing, Guild Leader," Su Qianliu said excitedly as she admired the shocked expressions of the players stuck in the Void Sea. The various powers are probably feeling dumbfounded right now. There were tens of millions of mythic-ranked Void Sea serpents on the Void Sea. This was a very frightening beast tide. With just the players and ships currently gathered here, there was no way to clear out these monsters in a short time. As a result, even the various hegemonic powers could only advance through the Void Sea at a snail's pace. At this rate, even getting close to the Void God's settlement would be a problem for the various hegemonic powers, let alone reaching it. However, it was a different story for Zero Wing. Although there were also monsters blocking the sky, the mutated Frostflame Phantom Dragon could break through these monsters' blockade easily. And once overtaken, none of these monsters could catch up to the Frostflame Dragon since their movement speeds were inferior to flying mounts. Because of this, the various hegemonic powers could only watch as Zero Wing's team rapidly closed in on the floating island. Meanwhile, after seeing the mutated Frostflame Phantom Dragon leaving behind the various powers' fleets, Wu Xiaoxiao looked to Jun Luosha and smiled, asking, "Well? I didn't lie to you, right, big sis Luosha? It's not a loss for you to join Zero Wing. None of the various hegemonic powers can hope to compare with Zero Wing. I truly did not think Guild Leader Black Flame would own a legendary flying mount," Jun Luosha exclaimed. "So long as this mount reaches Tier 5, Zero Wing can indeed hold its ground against the Divine Seal Saint. Currently, the miniature ancient world only allowed foreign Tier 4 players to enter it. No matter how much power the Divine Seal Saint wielded, he could, at most, send Tier 4 players on the verge of reaching Tier 5 into the miniature ancient world and have these players quickly get promoted to Tier 5 once they entered the world passage. However, if the mutated Frostflame Phantom Dragon successfully got promoted to Tier 5, it'd be invincible among Tier 5 players. At that time, Zero Wing could put up a good fight even if it had to go up against an army of Tier 5 players. And if the flying mount could get promoted to Tier 6, it'd be invincible in the miniature ancient world. At that time, even a force of 100 Tier 6 players would be nothing to it. Of course, the Paimon conglomerate would never mobilize 100 Tier 6 players into the miniature ancient world. After all, a force of 100 Tier 6 players was significant even to the Paimon conglomerate. There was no way the conglomerate would commit so much combat power to a measly miniature ancient world. As the mutated Frostflame Phantom Dragon shook off the various powers' fleets, Dira's party of 5 also took notice of it. Damn it! Damn these natives! How did a bunch of natives get their hands on a legendary flying mount? Dira cursed, his eyes burning with jealousy as he looked at the rapidly approaching Frostflame Dragon. As mighty as the Paimon conglomerate was, even it only had 4 legendary flying mounts in its possession. Moreover, they were acquired through many years of effort and accumulation. Meanwhile, apart from the conglomerate's current helmsman getting to use one, the remaining 3 were in the hands of the conglomerate's old monsters. So, let alone Dira, not even his father, the Divine Seal Saint, got to use a legendary flying mount. If his father wanted to obtain a legendary flying mount, he'd either have to wait until the conglomerate found a new one or one of the conglomerate's old monsters thoroughly retired from God's domain. Yet, now, a measly native of the miniature ancient world actually owned a legendary flying mount. This situation was utterly absurd. Rest assured, young master. Even if Black Flame has a legendary flying mount, he still won't beat us to the Void God settlement, Platinum Behemoth, the leader of the 4 Beast Warriors, said in a reassuring tone. The other 3 Beast Warriors also nodded in agreement. The closer they got to the Void God settlement, the more void creatures they had to face. When they got within 10,000 yards of the floating island, they already had to go up against over 100 void sea serpents and over a dozen void sea dragons simultaneously. The only reason their party of 5 could still advance toward the floating island at a rapid pace was because they had 4 Tier 5 players in a battle array. A legendary flying mount might be powerful, but its massive body would also attract the attention of many void creatures. Take the current situation, for example. Even though the Frostflame Dragon had yet to move within 10,000 yards of the floating island, it already had to go up against over 400 void sea serpents and over a dozen void sea dragons at a time. With only a Tier 4, legendary flying mount, Zero Wings team shouldn't think of advancing any further once they reached the 10,000-yard mark. I know that, Dira said before retracting his gaze and refocusing his attention on the floating island. A legendary flying mount might be tempting, but it was nothing compared to the Void Saint hidden class. So long as he could become a Void Saint, he might very well have a chance of joining the 7 Luminaries Alliance's Senate. Even the Paimon conglomerate's helmsman would have to behave humbly in front of him if he succeeded. Obtaining a legendary flying mount would also become a piece of cake. A short moment later, the mutated Frostflame Phantom Dragon could be seen catching up to the flying mounts belonging to paragons such as Trekt and Saint 9. At the same time, all these flying mounts entered within 10,000 yards of the floating island. Meanwhile, as soon as these flying mounts crossed the 10,000-yard mark, each flying mount came face to face with over 1,000 void sea serpents and several dozen void sea dragons. Trekt and the other paragons could feel their scalps tingling when they saw how many enemies they had to go up against. It was especially so when they saw how many void sea dragons stood in their way. The void sea dragons were not only superior mythic monsters but also void sea creatures. Even players with Tier 5 combat power could, at most, resist the attacks of 2 or 3 void sea dragons simultaneously. They would instantly fall if they had to go up against several dozen simultaneously. At this time, Trekt and the other paragons weren't the only ones feeling the pressure. Midsummer and the others riding atop the Frostflame Dragon also felt their confidence wavering. Everyone, get ready to defend, Su Qianliu anxiously commanded as she readied the staff in her hand. The Frostflame Dragon might be faster than the void creatures, but it still needed considerable time to maneuver its way across the monster's blockade. This meant that those riding on the Frostflame Dragon would have to survive the onslaught of several dozen void sea dragons for a considerable amount of time. That won't be necessary. While everyone was getting ready to defend themselves, Laura suddenly stepped to the front of the crowd. Then, she calmly said, "All you need to do is stand still." Stand still? Midsummer and the others couldn't help but be confused as they looked at Laura, failing to comprehend what the other party was trying to convey. However, before the crowd on the Frostflame Dragon's back could process Laura's words, Laura suddenly unsheathed the longsword by her waist. Subsequently, all everyone managed to see was a blinding light appearing in front of them, followed by Laura returning her longsword to its sheath. Boom! 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 When Laura's longsword clicked into its sheath, blood suddenly burst from the bodies of the several dozen void sea dragons in the distance. Then, these superior mythic monsters fell to the void sea down below one after another. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories,